Today, we are talking about growing your book of business, but this episode is going to apply to you whether or not you're a partner or working in big law or even own your own practice. What you are going to learn in this episode is going to apply to you no matter where you are in your practice. And you are going to hear inspirational stories from my guests this week. So keep listening to get all the goods. Hello, my friend. I hope you're having a fabulous week. I have a really special treat for you. It's with great pleasure that I bring on my guest, Heather Moulder. She graciously had me on her podcast. Her podcast is called the Life and Law Podcast, which I suggest you go listen to. I'm going to link to our episode that we had together in the show notes. Because we're talking about sustainable growth in this episode, I want to invite you to download my free workbook to help you make more time to grow. It's called Your Step-by-Step Playbook for Creating Effective and Efficient Systems. It went hand in hand with an episode of Be a Better Lawyer, episode 292, where I talk about systems creation. You can grab it at dinacataldo.com/systems. That's dinacataldo.com/systems. All right, let me give you a rundown of what's in store for you today. Yes, you're absolutely going to hear about how to grow a sustainable practice where you can grow your book of business without the stress, a practice where you're not burning out. But this episode is about so much more, and we cover so much good stuff here, including Heather's burnout story and the moment she realized she needed to change firms. And if you're in this position of considering whether you want to stay where you are, you're going to want to hear her experience, what Heather needed to do to take a first step towards making that change, because there's always a first step involved and it's always scary. You're going to get golden questions that we both pose to you in this episode. And I encourage you to answer them for yourself. If you're not driving, if you're, piddling around the house or doing something, I want you to grab a piece of paper and I want you to jot these questions down and answer them. The people who have the biggest impact in their lives using this podcast are the ones who are answering the questions that are posed in the episodes. So I encourage you to do that. You're also going to hear some of my backstory that I haven't shared much about on this podcast, where her and my stories intertwine, and you're going to hear so much more. This was really a great episode. All right, I think I've given you enough teasers, so let's dive in. I am so glad that I get to bring to you my special guest today, Heather Moulder. She is a former Big Law partner turned lawyer leadership and business coach who helps lawyers become happily successful in law and life. After over 14 years of private practice, where she built a multi-million-dollar book of business and over 25 combined years of lawyering, mentoring, and coaching lawyers, she's realized that success is created from the inside out. She helps lawyers achieve success on their terms without the need to leave the law or even their law firm behind. Welcome to Be a Better Lawyer podcast, Heather. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited about the conversation we're going to have.
Yeah, when I brought this topic up to you, I thought of this topic and I thought of you immediately because I know that a lot of what you talk about on your podcast and what you talk about, in your LinkedIn posts, it's really geared towards partners who are growing their books of business. You talk about a lot of other things, but that's a big topic you talk about.
Yep.
And, we work with similar people, but your background in creating your book of business is an expertise I just am so happy to get to bring to this podcast and to the people listening.
I'm excited to talk about it. When you asked me and I said, okay, so I could talk about a lot of things. What is it you want to talk about? And you said it was this. I'm like, oh, yay, because it's my favorite thing to talk
I
about.
had a feeling you'd be up for it.
Yep.
So let's just kind of jump in. Like, I know I gave you an intro, but can you just jump in and tell me why you're so passionate about helping lawyers, and particularly the lawyers that you like to focus on?
So I feel like there are a lot of coaches out there who deal with getting out of law. And I wasn't that person who left the law because I hated it. I think there's a lot of coaches who did, and they're probably the right people to help people get out of the law because that's what they did and they know it and they know that place. I don't know that place. I actually loved practicing. So I have a little bit of a different story. It's a little aligned to yours, for you know this, but your audience is going to find out. But I had breast cancer at the age of 38.
Mm.
And I had two young kids at the time. They were 6 and 2. My cancer was very aggressive. I was a partner. I had a book of business. I found a way to keep that book going while I took 10 months off to deal with the cancer without really working, by the way. And, came back raring to go thinking, gonna keep going, gonna keep doing this. And a couple of years in, I realized, wait, something has changed, and I'm not really quite sure what that thing is, but I need to figure it out. Because there was this moment I was doing dishes in my kitchen, and I had this, what I can only describe as like an out of body experience. And I am not a woo girl, FYI, at all. It sounds very woo because it felt very woo at the time, but I was looking at myself from above. I'm looking at myself going, she looks like me. When she speaks, she sounds like me, but she doesn't feel like me anymore. Like, who am I and what's going on here? So that was kind of the starting point for me to leaving the law and starting my coaching practice.
Mm.
Fast forward a couple of years, and I've kind of figured out I wanted to leave. And the thing that I realized was I did still really enjoy the practice, but some of my values that I'd had that made me a great lawyer, made me love the practice, had really changed through that cancer experience. And when I had had cancer and I took 10 full months off without really doing much of anything. And I had two young kids, and my husband was working full time. And we had people coming out from everywhere, people we hardly knew, people from our school that we didn't even like, we knew their name, but we didn't know them. Um, Really helping us, taking my kids to places, getting them out and about, bringing us meals almost daily. And I realized that that individualized attention had really, really helped us. And what I was now craving was a way to individually help people. So service is a big value of mine, always has been. The value got redefined through that experience. And I had been one of those lawyers who went to law school with a purpose. I really wanted to be a lawyer like since I was 11. It's one of these weird.
Wow. Are
Yeah,
you
I
kidding? I don't know that I've
know.
really talked to anybody who's been like, yes, I wanted to be a lawyer since I was
I know.
11. Wow.
Well, my mom had a friend who was in law school and it seemed really cool and interesting. And there was this show called The Paper Chase, and this totally
Oh,
ages
yeah.
I got really into that got me into the law. This is what I thought legal work was like.
Hmm.
But going to law school, I loved it. I loved being a lawyer. I loved the challenge of it. I loved the thinking processes. I loved all of that. But a couple of years in, I was one of those burned out lawyers.
Mm.
And I went through this experience of looking around going, wait, so many people are unhappy. So many lawyers are in this place of complete burnout, and yet they're still pushing through until they just can't do it anymore. Why? Like, this should be more fun, right? And
Hmm.
I did find a way to have more fun with it. And I did turn it around. And so I was looking back on my life and I was looking around and I'm like, I can help people and I can help them not get out of the law, but stay and actually succeed in a way that feels good.
Mm.
Because success isn't success just because you got a lot of money and
Hmm.
prestige and people think well of you. You need to enjoy who you are, how you show up every single day, what your life looks like, how it feels, the integration of what you're doing versus how you're able to show up at home with friends, having hobbies, right? Like, not a lot of lawyers
Hmm.
have hobbies anymore once
Hmm.
they've practiced for a while. You know, helping them to be whole people with a whole life.
Yes. And it's so funny because I am incredibly woo. And it's like, I don't even talk about how woo I am, but I am like on that spectrum of whoa, woo. But the experience that you expressed is something that so many people might have just written off. And that
Oh, yeah.
experience was so important. Even if, you may not have thought, anything about in terms of what it meant physiologically or energetically, like, people like me might, right? You had this opportunity to create a perspective outside of yourself that coaches can give people, but we hardly ever even tap into. So, like, you had
Right.
that moment where you said, wait a minute, like, there's something else happening. Like, I'm not aligned the way that I used to be, and I'm noticing it. And then you went out and you decided, okay, what's different? You asked yourself questions, which is so important. Anyone listening, if you're
Yep.
experiencing like this experience where you maybe feel a little off, you're maybe not as fulfilled in your practice, pay attention to these questions because they're so important to ask yourselves. And Heather asked them, I asked them of myself, is like, what's going on? And what what is it that I can do to even just take the first step to move more in alignment with who I want to be?
Hmm.
I'm curious, I want to talk about some of the other things you mentioned, but I'm curious what that very first step was for you.
It was to have a conversation with my husband about it, actually,
Mm,
because I realized that I would do nothing if I didn't say it out loud to somebody else.
mm,
I think we tend to have these moments in our lives where we think, oh, something's off. Well, I got to deal with it. And we keep it inside of us. And, fast forward 5 years and we still haven't done anything about it. And it's even worse because the one thing I definitely have learned throughout my life is when those things happen and we think, well, I'll just wait. I'll
mhm.
stay on the same path. At least I know what that path is. You actually don't.
Yeah.
Because staying on that same path changes you
Yeah.
in ways you won't don't rec so you one day you wake up and you don't even recognize yourself anymore. There is risk in not doing anything just as much, if not more, and oftentimes it's a lot worse risk in that way than starting down that path. So yeah, saying it out loud to my husband, I knew I needed to. It was the scariest thing I ever did. And
Mm.
he was like, "Do you need to stop? Are you ready to quit now? What do you want?" Like his mind's going, and he is a very non-woo person too, right? Very like salt of the earth, like let's tackle this problem and
Right.
figure it out. So his mind's going, okay, financially, can we handle this? What do we have to do here?
He's
I'm like, no,
already
no,
in
no.
doing mode. Yes,
Yes,
I
yes.
definitely
I'm like, no,
agree
no,
with
no, no,
that.
no. Step back. I need to take the next, I'm still going to practice. I'm still going to do my things. I just need you to know this. And I'm going to start exploring and figuring out what else I want to do. So the second stop, just so you know, was okay, let's start asking questions about what interests me, what excites me, what might something else look like. And I explored I went from nutrition to like work-life balance coaching to all these different things, right? And
Hmm.
ultimately, it was a friend who I had lunch with. And that's the other thing. I started telling others I trusted about this
Hmm.
feeling that was going on
Hmm.
because other people can really help you.
Yes.
When you
Yes.
stay stuck in your head, you don't help yourself, you spin.
Yes.
But when you say it out loud to other people, they can suggest things because they know you. They see strengths in you. They see things in you that you may not even realize are there.
Hmm.
And she looked at me and was like, Heather, have you thought of coaching? I think you'd be really
Hmm.
good at it because she's a coach.
Hmm.
That was the seed that got planted. That ultimately, I think it was about 6 months later after I'd gone through all these other things, made the decision I am going to join a coach school and do it on the side and see what it's like.
It's so funny. Your path and my path are very similar. Like
Mm.
after my diagnosis, and I just started trying everything because I knew that, chemo felt like a vacation. I knew that was wrong. I'm like, why does this feel good compared to my trial practice? This does not make sense. And so my first step, because I didn't have a partner or anything like that. My first step was just, well, let's just explore what's out there. So I did yoga teacher training. I painted. I tried running, which it turns out I wasn't a fan, but now I'm apparently becoming a fan. I don't know. Apparently I'm going through a transition with that. I tried, starting a tea business, and in that process of trying things, I discovered I loved business. I
Mm.
loved marketing. And then I found out about coaching through it too. And I was like, what is this thing called coaching? And I basically, end of story, right? But it's just so fascinating when we allow ourselves just to take that first step
Yeah.
and then to explore and play
Hmm.
how we can. just find these connections for ourselves, but then it's important not to get frustrated because it takes that experimentation. And then in that moment that you're ready, some kind of data will drop. Like it'll be a friend who walks into your life and says, "What about coaching?"
Right, right. And you have to explore though. That's the one thing. And this is where lawyers get messed up the most. And this
Mm.
happens in their practices too. Okay. So we are so afraid of trying new things and it quote unquote not being the right thing, not working out, being a mistake, all of that, that we don't even try. And yet, if you just shift it a little bit and go, okay, I actually have to explore to see if I even like this, to
Yeah.
see if this is even something that could work. You cannot know if it stays stuck in your head. You can only know if you go out and try the thing. And
Yeah.
oftentimes, the first thing isn't the thing. The second thing isn't either. It takes some time, but it's, as you said, data. It gives you new and better data about, okay, what is going to be the thing? What might be the thing that works? And it helps you get to the place that ultimately you want to be at.
I think this is a really good transition to talk about partners
Mhm,
who maybe are in a place where they're doing well financially.
mhm,
They're doing well, they've got their clients coming in, and not only that, they've got lots of opportunities coming to them, and they have lots of opportunities they want to seek out. And
mhm.
so they're doing all the things, but they're noticing, you're laughing
That's part
because
of
you
the
know where I'm
problem.
going with this. You're laughing because I think, they're noticing how stressed out and overwhelmed they are, but they keep doing the same thing and not getting that awareness and then not even knowing what the first step is to even understanding what's going on because they think they're doing the right things because their eye is focused on building business, building security for a family, starting to really create nest eggs and, investments and all of that. And their brain is stuck on, I need more clients.
Right.
And so I'm curious, like coming from your perspective, did you experience this or did you witness this?
Okay, so I witnessed it in a big way all the time. I, when I say I was in that burnt out mode early on, I had this moment of, okay, what is going on here and how can I fix it? And the first thing I did is I looked around at the partners in my then current firm and I noticed something. I noticed that 90% of them were not happy, but there was a 10% like population. They're like, they seem pretty happy. They have pretty decent practices and they're more balanced. Like, what's going on here? And I realized they did things very differently than everybody else.
Mm,
So we lawyers, we love our gold stars. We love to be told we're great. We get a little into our ego at
mm,
times. We love to compete. And it leads us on this path of constantly going after those gold stars. But the problem is those gold stars are, the standards are set by other people. They're not our own. And that is where I realized, oh, I'm not going to do it this way. So I left that firm, went to another firm. It's funny because I went from a regional firm to a big law firm and actually made my life in a big law firm and was very happy. But
nice.
it was a big law firm that was very entrepreneurial and kind of let you do your own thing. So that's why I
Mm,
went there, so that I could build the practice I wanted. And the real difference that I saw of those smaller percentage of lawyers that were really happy who were partners, they did do things differently. They also understood that there are trade-offs in life. And so they were very intentional about the trade-offs that they would make. What
mm,
is worth it? What is not? It's
yeah.
an intentionality and a strategy that you really bring to into play. And yes, it sometimes means not making as much money, but let me tell you, you're still making really great money. So why does it matter if you're at least happy, right?
Yeah. And it's so interesting because I think that as lawyers, when you're in a practice, like this was my experience, and this is kind of what you're expressing in a way, is when I was practicing as a criminal prosecutor, I hired a coach, and the coach actually offered to me the question, like, what if you could do something else? Like, what if you
Hmm.
could just like move to a firm? My brain couldn't even get me there at that point. I had just started with my coach, and it was just like, I couldn't even see myself moving from my current practice to practicing some other law. Like my
Right.
brain exploded. So, how was that? Was that easy for you to say, okay, well, this particular law firm isn't working for me. I enjoy the law. I don't like the way they're doing XYZ. So let me look for something else. Like, was that an easy process for you? Or did you just say, nope, I know what I
No,
want?
no, it took me. So I did not know coaching at the time. Coaching wasn't even a big thing back
Yeah.
then in general, and it certainly was not known in the legal field. So I kind of flailed around for a couple of years figuring this out.
Got it.
So it took me a good 2.5 years to
Hmm.
of watching, thinking, transforming internally.
Hmm.
I think the first piece for me was realizing I have to have boundaries and I
Hmm.
have to start taking care of myself first because if I can't, I won't be here for very long. And I can't do work for others to the, level that I would like.
Yeah.
And something funny happened when I started that is, 6 months later, people started noting how much better my work product was, how much, even though I had boundaries, even though I said no, even though I prioritized myself. So that was kind of that starting point. And then it just kind of like built from there. And over time, and at the time, I did not have language around this because, again, coaching wasn't a thing. This is as a coach, we talk about values all the time.
Hmm.
But I started getting into why did I choose to do this? What's most important to me? How does that fit in with the rest of my life? And it became a very values based exercise. So once I kind of got into what my values were, and I don't remember if I what I called them or if I called them anything, but I knew family, service, connection, freedom, those were kind of like big things for me.
Yeah.
It became very clear that the firm I was at, it was one of those uber structured, very committed, old line, been around
Hmm.
forever law firms. And it just wasn't a good place for me. I loved the lawyers. They did great work. They were nice people, but structurally, it wasn't a good fit. It was a very toxic fit for me. And I finally could see why. And so that was when, okay, I got to find another place, but I can't find another law firm like this. And so at the time, I was scared to death that I'm never going to find another law firm that's going to meet my needs because most are like this, right? Which is
Hmm.
actually not true. There's a lot of different kinds of law firms out there. Lucky for me, during that process, a law firm came around, opened a new office here in Dallas, Texas, which is where I'm based. I know these things happen, right, for a reason. And it was the perfect place. Very entrepreneurial, hire in as a senior associate, promises of partnership. I could build my own book. I could even get started before making partner. They lived up to that. And it fit my freedom, my service. It still did a type of law that was interesting to me. I was a finance lawyer. I was not a litigator, different type of finance, but it was more challenging and interesting. And so it kind of opened up a new world for me. It was just like the perfect thing that came along at the perfect time.
I love that you said that. Yeah, I know. Things happen for
Uh-huh.
a reason, right? But literally, like when I started paying attention, I started seeing things open up for me. And that sounds exactly what's happening for you. The universe has a plan for us, and we may not even know what it is. You may not have even been able to have moved, even if they had opened two
Mm,
and a half years prior, you might not even have been in a place where you could have gotten yourself in that position.
right.
But you put yourself in this position of improving your boundaries and then noticing how putting yourself first really improved your work product and getting all of that feedback. And that put you in this perfect position so that when the time aligned, you were able to do
Right.
that, right? I'm coming
Right.
from my woo perspective, but I think that
I
that's
know.
just beautiful,
I
right?
mean, I like from a non-woo perspective, what
Yeah.
I like to think of it as, look, I think the opportunities are often there. We have no
Also true.
capability of seeing them
Also
until
true.
we open up to that. So when you get to this place where your mentality is finally ready to open up to that, all of a sudden it feels like opportunities are rushing at you. They were there. You
Yeah.
just didn't, you couldn't see them.
Yes. And that's why it's so important to pay attention and to start where you are. Like, you don't need to be further ahead because it worked for you. Like, it worked out.
Correct.
But one of
Correct.
the things that you said, well, there are a couple things that you said there. One is for anyone listening to this, go back to the questions that Heather asked around values, because
Mhm.
those questions, if you're not asking those questions of yourself, you're missing out on gold because that's going to
Mhm.
give you so much awareness of where you are right now and where you want to be. and you're going to start gaining these awarenesses that we're talking about, and you're going to start seeing things differently. And you may even start seeing opportunities around you open up that you weren't aware of before, because now you're putting your attention on those particular things that are valuable to you and that are
Right.
not valuable to you. So you're going to be able to focus your attention differently when you go back and listen to those questions and you pay
Right.
attention to like your values. I think that's one thing I wanted to say. The second is I wanted to circle back to how people around you started noticing the improvement in your work product when you started putting yourself first. And that brings me back to partners who are working to get the next best thing, the next hot thing, to add to their book of business, but they're not creating a practice that's sustainable. And so they're out of
Right.
balance and they're not giving themselves what they need to create balance. So
Right.
I want to take the conversation up from there.
Hmm.
What did you when you start saying, I started to create boundaries and put myself first, I want to take those two items and I want to break them down a little bit. So
Hmm.
one is, what does it mean to you to create boundaries when you're working within a law firm?
So, really great question, because I often get, and you may hear this from your clients too, I get this red herring of, well, it's not like I can leave at 5:30 every day. That's
Right.
what they think boundaries are, right?
Right.
Not what boundaries are.
Right.
So, you got to get really clear about who you want to be, how you want to show up, and who it is you're there to serve. And understand, like really get into, and this of course gets back to your values, because when you do that, it gives you permission internally to then open up and say, okay, this is really what I want, and this is really what I don't. And then that showcases I need rules and standards around these things. To me, boundaries are rules, right? They're your rules for how do people need to treat me? How do I need to ensure I feel, right? When it comes to interactions with people, when it comes to what you say yes and no to, when it comes to how you respond when somebody tries to push in on one of those boundaries, the boundary is really just the rule. Everybody thinks the saying no is the boundary. That's not. It's basically enforcing a boundary in some way, shape, or form. But the boundary itself is, what are my rules? So you have to figure that out. And the rules need to come from, okay, who do I want to be? How do I want to show up?
Hmm.
Because if you don't do that, and not just at work, by the way, because again, you're a whole person. You have an integrated whole life, and we've got to stop compartmentalizing everything. How you show up at work impacts how you show up at home, and vice versa. And what
Yes.
happens in both sides impacts, right? So stop thinking of them as separate.
Mhm.
And what that showed me was very clearly the kind of clients I did and did not want to work for.
Mm.
Very clearly the type of partners I wanted to work with and who I did not want to work with. And by the way, every law firm has partners you would like to work with and partners you would not like to work with, no matter
Mm.
how great the firm, right? And
Yeah.
it does not mean they're bad people. What it does mean is they conflict or clash in some way, shape, or form with your values and who you are and how you want to show up. And so you need to limit that. And so that's where those rules come into play.
Yeah, and I think that's so good to recognize because sometimes I'll talk to lawyers and they'll say, "Well, I don't like my firm because of this partner." And it's like it's not, like there's other avenues and there's also I think that's really great information, great data to
Mhm.
take back to yourself and say, "Okay, I don't like being treated like this. I want to be treated with kindness and I want, I don't want to be thought that you can call me at 10 at night. Like I want like there's these different things that you that are not in alignment with that particular person, right?
Right.
And if that extends to your whole firm, that definitely gives you the data about, the experience that, you didn't describe that particular experience, but
Mhm.
it gives you data to make decisions.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And oh, go ahead. Ask the
No, no, no.
question.
Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, when it comes to being a partner and trying to build your own business, something that you really want to ask yourself is, what is it I want to do and who is it I want to do for?
Hmm.
right? We talk a lot when it comes to marketing and business development about niching. And niching, yes, is important, but we don't go foundationally into where to start on niching.
Hmm.
Niching isn't just about I pick this industry or, and market to this industry. It's also about, okay, who do I want my clients to be? What industry do I want to be in? Who do I want to be working with, colleague, peer wise? Who do I
Yes.
want to have on my team? Where do I want to be doing this? In what practice area with what group of people, right? It gets to the what and the who of what you're doing on a day-to-day basis. And if those things are not aligned to your values, you are going to have a fundamental disconnect with what you're doing. You are not going to be very happy. You are going to feel like your workplace is very toxic because guess what? It is for you because there's a values misalignment or a
Hmm.
clash there. And it can be as simple as so I had a client who, when she first came to me, she was like, I'm a healthcare lawyer. I picked this very specifically. I care a lot about all these things in the healthcare industry, right? And yet, over time, because it was easy, because it was the kind of work that was coming into her firm from a healthcare perspective, her book of business was like 70% clients who were getting into the healthcare industry for the money. They didn't care about
Mm.
people, they didn't care about health. She's very into nutrition, she's very into like holistic well-being. None of it was that. And when we dug into it and realized like this is your real problem, like, you are representing people you are completely unaligned with. The answer was very clear. So her boundaries, coming back to boundaries, were okay, I say no to this type of work. I start getting out and offloading it. I start going after the stuff that I care about.
Yeah, and there's so much. I want to address that question because I think that's scary for people who have been working so hard to build a book of business
Mhm.
and then they realize, "Oh, wait a minute. I don't like working with 70% of the people that I'm working with." And so tell us the first step. I mean, it's going to be uncomfortable. Let's just start there. First, it's going to be uncomfortable to say no. It's going to be uncomfortable to say no in terms of like moving forward with saying no to additional work from these people and really building up the belief that you can get more people, move that 30% that you love and make it into a huge part where you're still
Mhm.
making money. So
Mhm.
let's just take that as a given. It's going to be uncomfortable
Yep.
when you are working with people who are undergoing this transition, this transformation of their practice, like
Mhm.
what do you see aside from the discomfort, the biggest thing that comes up for them?
Well, they're all terrified that they're going to end up underneath a bridge in a box because
Yes.
there is this weird thing amongst lawyers where we think that if somehow we say no to any one thing, it means this huge ripple effect that compounds and compounds and compounds very quickly without
Yes.
us ever being able to intervene in the middle.
Right.
So a lot of times, really the first step is like seeing that for what it is
Hmm.
and calling it out. We don't realize that's what's actually going on.
Yeah.
And when you start to call it out and break it down and go, "Oh, really? Like, do you think you could do it this way? Or there's also assumptions, right, going on with that,
Yeah.
where well, I'm just going to say no to everything and it'll all be gone in 2 months.
Hmm.
No, that's not actually how it works,
Right.
right? You don't have to do it that way if you don't want to.
Yeah.
So a lot of it is figuring out the beliefs, the things that we have going on in our mind, pulling them out, parsing them out, challenging those because we can't it's very hard to really start taking that action without getting that out in the open and figuring out what's there and calling it out a little bit and saying, okay, yeah, that's probably a little bit ridiculous.
Yeah.
So now I'm ready to take an actual action step,
Yeah. I
which
think
it doesn't have to be overnight. Everything doesn't have to be done at once.
Right. I think our brains as lawyers tend towards that too, is thinking it all has
Yes.
to be done at once, whether it's doing stuff on your calendar or, the work that's coming in or even making a transition in your business. And, when you said that, I mean, those are all things that I needed a coach to help me see, to
Hmm.
see, oh, wait a minute, like, oh, when I'm building my business and I raise my rates, that I'm going to be okay. you know, or if I decide I'm going to say no to this person because their values don't align with my values, it's going to be okay
Hmm.
because that one decision that you make is not going to have this um, apocalyptic
Right.
impact on your business, your practice. Like it's just not going to be what your brain initially will always tell you it's going to be. And we've got to question that. And if we don't have somebody who's in there who can see what's happening and pauses us and says, hold on, let me question that. Let's actually see what's going to happen. Let's look at the reality of what can happen and what your options are. It makes it almost
Yes.
impossible to take the next step.
It does. And we go with this assumption of we'll give up everything at once. Everything will go to zero. And
Yeah.
there's nothing I can do about it. Like on the other side of it, if you're freeing up time, right? The biggest thing that lawyers who come to me as far as not being able to do the business development work, the
Mhm.
thing that they say is, well, I don't have time. Well, when you say no to those clients that drain you the most, it's not just about hours, by the way.
Mhm.
You are giving up less hours than you realize by saying no to the one client who's really draining on you the most. But what you're also getting rid of is the emotional baggage, the mental drain, the physical exhaustion that comes from having to deal with them, that then frees up so much more energy to do the work that you need to do on the other side to start attracting the clients you actually want to be working with. So
Yeah.
we don't realize, oh yeah, but then I get to take action items and I'll have the energy for it and I'll have some time for it and I'll have the ability to finally do it.
Yes. Yes. I mean, that was true in my life. I know it's been true in your life. It's like, wow, look at what opens up for us when we
Right.
free up space in our life.
Correct.
The next part of this, I wanted to ask you around putting your self-worth first, right? Noticing, as a result of the boundaries, putting yourself first and all of the things
Mhm.
that you were doing, your work product improved. And you
Mhm.
still kept up like a multi-million-dollar book of
Mhm.
business, right? Like you were still taking care of yourself. You were still
Yes.
able to hold a book of business that was,
Yes.
yeah, right? So
Yeah.
there's a lot of people listening right now who are
In big
like,
law.
right in big law, a lot of people listening right now are probably thinking like, "What? What do you mean?"
Mhm.
And so what did you do to take care of yourself, put yourself first in the context of being able to, and I know you just talked a little bit about this in terms of knowing who you want to work with, right?
Mhm.
And to be able to have those aligned values with your clients. But what else
Mhm.
did you do to put yourself first that put you in the position to grow your practice in big law while taking care of yourself?
So it's probably going to surprise you because it's not really a self-care answer, but it
Oh,
is.
that's not what
Okay.
yeah, I know what you
So,
mean.
okay. So it is a couple of things. So number one, I was really, really good about knowing exactly who to say yes and who to say no to
Hmm.
and sticking to it no matter what. And when I built my practice, so it's a couple of things. So we talked about the values. The values come into play also in how you go about building your practice. And there are other things that come into play. So your strengths, everybody has strengths, right? And our strengths show up in the work that we do. Our strengths show up in the things that we do. I have discovered over time that strengths are kind of a self-care act, like being able to lean into your strengths.
Yeah.
They're what energize you to do the things you do.
Yeah.
And your strengths show up in your personal life, in the hobbies that you choose, and also in your work. So, what I did was I really honed in on what I loved the most about the work that I did
Hmm.
for the clients I loved the most. Built, I really went after the clients I loved the most. My clients were not clients, they were friends.
Mm.
They were part of my client development. So the people that I've targeted, because family's a top value, they all had families. Family was all very important to them. I was in the finance industry as a woman. My clients were primarily men, FYI.
Mm.
But they all had families, kids they would love to talk about, and they loved football. I'm a football fan, big
Nice.
football fan. So we had a lot of commonalities. We would talk a lot. I used my husband as a business developer too. So we would have families over. We would cook dinner with one another.
Right.
That to me was an act of self care because I was honing in on things that were important to me with people who were important to me. And again, connection, big value of mine, connecting with them on a deeper level. So
Yeah.
the self-care piece was there. I never felt like business development for me was this thing I had to do that was no fun, that was horrible. Like networking to me was fun because I was networking with the right people. So that
Mm-hmm.
was one big piece of it. And then the other one is leaning into your strengths, as I said earlier. Like I love to solve complex problems. I loved structuring stuff. I loved, getting on conversations and like, whoa, wait, all this is going on. Okay, let's break it down. I love to break everything down, right? And so I honed in on those more and more. I utilized storytelling to highlight those things with people as I was networking in my marketing efforts when I spoke, things like that. So that attracted more of the right people to me and kind of self-selected the wrong people out who didn't care about my approach, my style, my way of doing. And so I really built this cohesive kind of business around me that was very supportive. That, yes, sometimes I had to work a lot because that's life as a lawyer, right?
Mm-hmm.
But when I did it, I was doing it with people I cared about, who cared about me, who, if I called them and said, look, I am not feeling it tonight, things are just like, it's too much. I need a break and I'll be back to you tomorrow. They'd say, yeah, Heather, we totally can wait. We had that kind of relationship, right?
Yeah.
So again, when you build holistically this right kind of a business, and not everybody, most of my clients don't do business development the same way. We hone in on their strengths, we
Right.
hone in on their values, and we figured out how to make it work for them
Right.
in the life they want. It's a lot easier, and
Mm-hmm.
it integrates the two more fully, the two sides of your life, in a way that feels manageable, doable, isn't so stressful because you truly enjoy it and you truly love the people you're working with on a daily
Yeah.
basis.
Yeah, and I want to really highlight this because some of the work I do is helping lawyers find out, okay, like this is the person I like thinking about their best fit client.
Yeah.
And I think like so many lawyers, and there might be some listening right now, think, but then if I only focus on them, I'm missing out on all of this other stuff. So tell me what your thoughts are about that, especially when it comes to, chasing the hot thing and then being imbalanced in their current practice.
I mean, at the end of the day, you got to decide what is it I really want?
Yeah.
What is it? What is the life I really want? How do I want to integrate the two? And then build the practice around that, which means necessarily letting go of things.
Yeah.
But what I found is there's this fear at the outset of, but does that mean usually what I find in my clients, they're not fearful of missing out on those things. They're fearful that going at it in this like niched, specialized way means they can't make a living at it. Like
Mm-hmm.
somehow there's going to be so few people in that category for them that it's not going to be enough.
Mm-hmm.
So, a couple of things. You got to figure out what enough is.
Yes.
And a lot of us don't define that very clearly for ourselves. We define it based on what others say is enough. So
Yeah.
you got to do the work yourself. What is enough? What makes me feel financially stable? What is that goal? And then you need to just go out and do it. And what they find is, and I've never had this, it just doesn't happen. There are enough people out there to fulfill your needs.
Yeah.
And the more you show up as the person you truly are and how you want to be, and with the right energy and the right style and the right approach, and you showcase this is how I do things, the right people are going to self-select to you because here's the thing. The vast majority of lawyers out there are marketing and selling and networking the way most lawyers have always done it.
Yeah.
It's more needy, it's pushy, it's awkward. You're going to stand out in a really unique way. And you're especially going to stand out to the people who are good fits for you. And it's like a magnet. Like they
Yes.
will come to you. They will be like, oh my gosh, you're like speaking my language. You're my
Yes.
person. And you will have more than enough work.
Yes. And it's interesting, like when I talk to lawyers, the ones who are the happiest
Mhm.
are the ones who are just like they're nice people. Like those are the people, I know you like nice people too. I like
Yes.
nice people who, they want to do, like they're ambitious and they want to create a life they love, but they're just kind of stuck right now. But the ones that come to me who are the happiest are the ones that are are just themselves. And they have people coming up to them in their cities or their towns because they work with them and they talk to them because they're their friends. They're not just the clients, right? They're not just like
Right.
this anonymous client that, they feel disconnected from or that they've had to chase, right? Like they had to convince this person to be their client. It's like, no, like the people when you're yourself, when you're
Mhm.
you're at your best is when you're at yourself, people are going to be drawn to you.
Yes.
And there's so much opportunity out there for like we're both coaches, right? And we're now we've both been on each other's podcasts. It's like
Yep.
there's enough lawyers in this world who need help
Oh, yeah.
that, like we're not in competition because
No.
some people are going to be very drawn to you, some people are going to be very drawn to me or somebody else. Like it's a matter of just being yourself
Yep.
and then people will come to you.
And I like, something that we lawyers focus, and high achievers in general are like this, and
Yeah.
pretty
Yeah.
much every lawyer I've ever met is a high achiever. We focus so much on output,
Hmm.
right? Output meaning the goal, the money, the number of clients, the whatever, that what others think of us. We don't focus enough on input. And this shift that we're talking about is really what I like to say input over output.
Mm,
The output comes
yeah.
if the right input goes in. So again, focus on your values, leverage your strengths, learn to let go of the things you're weak at or that you don't enjoy doing or that you don't need to be doing anymore. Delegate more. Terrible. Lawyers are terrible at
Oh my
delegating.
gosh. Yes. I think as
you
this
know,
comes out, I just put an episode out about delegating because I
yeah.
was like, this needs to happen.
But this whole process helps with that because it gives you permission to hone in and lean into those things
Hmm.
that
Yeah.
are your lane and let go of all that other stuff, which is part of when you said at the very beginning, they're doing all the things. Yeah, that's the problem. They're
Yes.
doing all the things. You don't need to be doing all the things. You shouldn't be doing all the things. Stay in your lane. Do your
Yeah.
things.
Yeah. Yeah. And you know, when you were talking about that, so much of that, and I don't know how you talk about this with your clients, but I talk about my with my clients about this in terms of mindset. And
Hmm.
sometimes mindset can be kind of an amorphous idea, this idea that, oh, well, and it does sound kind of woo when you talk about it, but I didn't start there. I started with it being very math. Like it was very much like, oh,
Yep.
my input is how I'm thinking about a problem, my output is my result and what I'm getting. So if I'm thinking about a problem, that's the input, whatever I'm
Hmm.
thinking about it. And that thought can either be, it's not working, I can make this work. I see signs of it working. It is working, right? There's so much different input we could be placing in our brain. We may not even recognize that it's an optional thought that we can
Right.
actually change it. That's what coaching is about. You're not expected to just know this. Like this takes time and practice. But
Yep.
whatever you are thinking about your current situation, is going to determine what your output is. So if you think it's impossible to build a book of business that you love, or if you think it's impossible to create time to build a book of business that you love, then the output will always be exactly what you think the output is going to be.
You will not build the book of business because you won't put any or hardly any input in. Yeah.
Yeah.
I like to tell my like, look, there's no guarantee, right? The other problem with output is we hyper focus in on a bunch of stuff we can't control
Yeah.
because there are other people at play. There are other things, unexpected events come up, right? You can't control those things.
Mhm.
But what I can tell people is any lawyer can build a book of business. I cannot promise you how quickly you will get to the result you want, but if you have a reasonable expectation, 10 million in 2 years is probably not reasonable. However, you can get to that first million. Anybody can if they really want to, if they are consistent and they do the right things. And it
Mhm.
all starts with the right mindset to motivate you and be willing to try and explore and get vulnerable and make mistakes and be okay with it. And then learning from it and then consistency over time. You will
Yeah.
get there
Yes.
eventually. So I can't ever guarantee the exact results and the exact timing, but I can tell you it works. Like it is not rocket science. so when I say focus on input, focus on what you can control. Focus on
Yes.
the mindset. Have the consultant or coach that can help you. Have a good plan in place. Focus on your strengths. Align to your values. I will tell you, it's kind of like with my son Noah, who's in ninth grade, who is now learning that he actually has to read things. He can't just like listen amorphously. And like that's how he learns, is listening mostly. And
Mhm.
it's always gotten him good grades, but now that he's in a higher level, he needs to do more. And
Yeah.
he's starting to learn that even though he puts more input in, it doesn't guarantee the perfect result, but it sure as heck is way better than it would have been, right?
Right.
Like,
Right. Yeah, I think that is kind of funny that you say that because it made me think of, people who like I was a big podcast listener and I still am to a certain extent. But when I first started my business, I knew I needed to change my mindset after I
mhm.
learned, like, okay, here are all the things I could do. I recognized, oh, it's not just about the doing because I could do from a place of feeling anxious and struggling and pushing,
Yeah.
or I could implement the mindset. And then when I started seeing just a little bit of a tweak here and there, I saw, whoa, wait a minute. I'm actually taking action and I feel good. I don't feel like I'm
Yes.
pushing myself. And so that mindset changed how I thought generally about work and success and
Yep.
growing a business. And I think that what you're saying here that spoke to me is like, yeah, we could listen to the podcast all day long. And we're getting better results than we would without them. But are you noticing that you're still pushing in areas like, or,
Right.
those are some interesting things that I noticed that I needed to just start taking action.
Yep.
Some of that was, with a coach and like getting that help with the mindset. Some of that was, just getting data from me not getting the result I wanted and saying, oh,
Yep.
wait a minute, what was I thinking that created that result? What was all my input? What did I do? Was I thinking? How was I
Yes.
feeling?
Yes.
And that can show me why I got the result and then not to beat myself up about it and then go back and then rejigger it,
You
like
learn.
work it. Right. You got
Yeah.
to learn. And I like to call it like getting your hands dirty. It's like you got
Yep.
to go in, you got to get your hands dirty, you got to get messy, you got to make mistakes. Like what would you tell your clients?
Well, what comes to mind when you say all these things is
Yeah.
networking and asking for the business is like a big
Yeah.
area. We have all these thoughts and beliefs, right, that hold us back from even asking. And so a perfect example of this is if you're going in and you're in a situation where there's an opening, you're talking to somebody, you've taken them to lunch, you're like, my God, they're still not hiring me. But have you ever actually made the ask? Well, no, because that seems awkward and I shouldn't have to sell as a lawyer. And oh my God, what if they say no? And all these things going on in my mind, right?
Hmm.
So you don't. And you lose out because they mention, well, I have this new deal coming up, and they're probably thinking, hey, maybe they'd be good for it. But then if you don't say anything, they're probably thinking, oh, they're not interested. Or
Yeah.
maybe they don't have time for it right now. You don't know that, right? So you've got to make the ask. Now, also, if you do make the ask and you're thinking, oh my God, selling is pushy and awkward, and I feel so needy, and I really need this business right now, though. And how do you think you're going to make the ask versus, you know what? I just want to kind of serve them and see if this would be a fit.
Yeah.
There's Once you change your mentality around what selling is for you, comes across very differently.
Oh
It's a
yeah.
very different place. And so that's a perfect example of input over output. The output comes so much better, your output, and then their response, even if they say no, is going to be better because you've planted a seed for the future. But I
Hmm.
guarantee that if you ask in that needy, pushy way or in a really awkward, weird way, it's not planting a good seed, right?
No.
So,
Yeah, I mean, there really is a difference in like how you think about these kinds of approaches in your
yes,
business. Like everything that you do in your business, in your practice is going to be regulated by what's going on in your brain. What are you
correct.
thinking about when you make the ask, when do the work, whatever it
Right.
is. And boy, people can tell when you're pushing or you feel needy and
Yes.
graspy for sure.
And it's funny because a lot of people who hire me, they all know they're going to get the tactical stuff, right? The
Mhm.
practical stuff of let's figure out the right strategies and the tactics and how we're getting, what is our marketing going to be? And are we going to speak? Are we going to write? What are the things, right?
Yeah.
Sure. But the bulk of the work is actually where you're probably working with your clients, even if they're not on business development. It's in the mindset. It's in the
Yeah.
how do I actually go about this? How do I deal with this situation? How do I rethink this so that I can approach it in a way that feels good to me and also will get a better result?
Yes.
Yeah.
This has been such a fun conversation. Thank you for being
Yes.
here.
Thank
Can
you.
can you share with everybody where is the best place to find you? Obviously, they got to go listen to your podcast. Tell us all the things. I'll link to it in the show notes.
So, from a business perspective, my coaching website is coursecorrectioncoaching.com. And my podcast is lifeandlawpodcast.com. I am also on LinkedIn pretty much every day, at least weekday. So you can find me at Heather Moulder, and it's Moulder.
Excellent. All right. Thank you again. I know this has been a fabulous episode for everybody listening because you gave so much info. I would actually highly suggest going back and listening to this episode and pull out the questions that Heather and I posed because
Yeah,
those questions are going to give you so much awareness and data for you to move forward.
absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. This was fun.
Heather really showed up with so much value in this episode. Wasn't it fabulous? She really brought it, and I'm really appreciative of that. I'm going to link to everything that she mentioned in the show notes. And if you're ready to make the changes that we started talking about here today in this episode, I want to encourage you to book a strategy session with me. As you heard today, telling someone out loud that you're dreaming has a profound effect on you and how you show up in this world. Together, let's talk about what you're dreaming about and make it a reality. You can book a strategy session with me at dinacataldo.com/strategy session today. All right, my friend, thank you so much for joining me. I will talk to you next time. Bye.